Galactic Council betrayed humanity, now they beg for mercy. The chamber held 47 species and one agenda item, and I already knew how it was going to end. I had known for 3 days. That is how long it took me to count the votes. I am good at counting. It is the only thing that kept me from losing my mind in that building for 6 years, counting votes, counting favors, counting the small and careful promises that powerful people make when they want something and do not want to say so directly. 44 was the number I kept landing on. 44 out of 47. I ironed my uniform that morning anyway. Habit. Some habits are worth keeping even when the point of them is gone. The chamber smelled like recycled nitrogen and something floral that someone had pumped in to cover the stress pheromones from the Arathi delegation. The Arathi always smelled like whatever they were feeling. Right now they smelled like a garden trying too hard. I had a tablet under my arm. 902 pages. 3 years of work. Yemi's fingerprints were on every page of chapters 4 through 9, because Yemi had spent 14 months cross-referencing trade agreements to build the economic case, and Yemi had died of a punctured lung getting us the 2 veil abstentions, and the tablet did not know that, but I did. Drell, the Kreth ambassador, opened the session. He was very good at his job. I want to say that clearly. He stood at the podium in his ceremonial gray and presented the containment directive in language so careful, so measured, so deeply concerned with the safety and stability of the galactic community, that if you had not written the original theoretical framework it was based on, you might have believed him. I wrote the original theoretical framework. It was an academic exercise. My second year in the diplomatic corps. Professor Vonnen had asked for a hypothetical: how would the Council legally contain a species that posed an existential risk to interstellar stability? I received a high mark. I was 26 and proud of a lot of things I would later want to take back. Someone had found that paper. Taken it apart. Put it back together with Earth's name in every blank. The Containment Directive. Clause 7 Theta. Biosecurity grounds. Quarantine of all communication relays. Trade embargo. Military buffer zone. All very legal. All very clean. The kind of document that erases a civilization without using a single harsh word. I listened to every sentence Drell spoke. I did not move. He finished. The floor opened for response. I stood up. I spoke for 9 minutes. I presented the economic data. The cross-reference trade agreements. The legal precedents going back 400 years of galactic jurisprudence that specifically prohibited this kind of action against a species that had committed no act of aggression. I cited chapter and page. I was calm. I was thorough. I was, in that moment, the single most prepared person in a room containing 47 intelligent species. It did not matter. The vote took 11 minutes. 44 in favor. 1 against. 2 abstentions, the Veil, who sat in the back row and did not look at me during the count, but whose secondary eyelids, the ones they close when something bothers them, had been shut since Drell started talking. The Earth communication relays went dark in sequence. I watched the status board on the wall. One by one. Like lights going out down a long hallway. The relay at Jupiter Station. The one at the Mars outpost. The deep space array we had spent 11 years building. Gone. 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 The room began to clear. Species talking to species, the soft buzz of 46 civilizations returning to their ordinary lives. Drell approached me. He said a courtesy suite had been prepared for my comfort and safety. He said it was temporary. He said the Council valued Earth's eventual cooperation in the reintegration process. I thanked him. I meant it, actually. I needed 30 minutes alone, and he was giving them to me with a bow. A Kreth security escort walked me to the suite. Nice room. A bunk, a window looking out over the station's outer ring, a small table. I set the tablet on the table. 902 pages. Yemi's work in chapters 4 through 9. I sat on the edge of the bunk. I thought about the coffee ring on page 340, from the night Kate and I had worked through until morning rewriting the legal precedent section because Leon had found a gap in our argument at 2 in the morning and none of us could sleep until it was fixed. I thought about the vote. 44. Okay. I picked up the tablet. I did not open the counterproposal file. I opened a blank document instead. Not a protest. Not a petition. Something different. Something that started with a list of names, 44 names, 44 species, every ambassador who had raised a limb or a light pattern or whatever they used to cast a vote. I wrote down everything I knew about each of them. Which was considerable. 6 years is a long time to study people. I wrote down the structure of their economies, the location of their infrastructure, the names of their allies and the shape of their fears. I wrote for 27 minutes. Then I closed the document. I stood up. I folded the uniform jacket over the back of the chair. I lay down on the bunk and looked at the ceiling, which was a pale gray. I thought about Earth. What it would look like right now. The news breaking. The feeds going silent. People standing in front of screens watching the signal drop. I did not let myself stay there long. That road went somewhere I could not afford to go. I went back to the list. There was a word for what I was doing, and it was not grief, and it was not rage. It was closer to what a mechanic does when an engine fails. You do not cry about the engine. You open the hood. You find out exactly what broke and why. You figure out if there is something underneath the brake that can be used. There was something underneath. I could see it already, in the shape of the vote, in the 2 abstentions, in the very careful language of Clause 7 Theta, which had a flaw in it that no one would notice for a while. I had written it, after all. I knew exactly where the flaw was. 44 votes to contain us. Turns out, that was the easy part. 14 months. I know how that sounds. 14 months while Earth sat behind a communication blackout and a military buffer zone, and here I am writing about it like I watched from a distance. The truth is Messier. I was on the station for the first 3 weeks, technically a guest of the council, practically under observation, until Kate arrived on a supply runner. I do not know how she got clearance and I did not ask, and we left on a small transport with 12 other people and no announcement. We had a plan by the time we cleared the buffer zone. The plan was not complicated. It had one step. Get home. Then listen. Earth was not silent in the way the council expected. The council's models, I got access to those models later, all 47 pages of projections and probability curves, assumed that a species cut off from galactic trade and communication would turn inward. Compete for resources. Fracture. Their word, fracture, appears 11 times in the document, always with a certainty I found, honestly, a little insulting. The models were built on species that had never been bored. That is not a joke. The Kreth, the Orathi, the Vale, every major species in the council had steady access to galactic networks, trade, cultural exchange. Take that away and they wither. They do not have a word for what humans do when you lock them in a room with nothing to do. We have several words for it. The most useful one is productive. I got back to Earth on a Tuesday. I remember the day because Owen met me at the landing pad, Owen who was 22 and had ears too large for his head and had been running communications for the diplomatic team since before the vote, and he handed me a folder before I had even stepped fully off the ramp. I looked at the cover. Then at him. How long has this been going on? I asked. Since about a week after the vote, he said. Director Finn thought you would want to know the minute you landed. I opened the folder. The Alcubierre drive refinements had been in theoretical development for 30 years. Everyone knew that. What I had not known, what nobody outside a very specific research building in New Mexico had known, was that the team had been 12 weeks away from a working prototype when the vote happened. The council's blockade cut off their supply chain overnight. 3 imported components, gone. So the team improvised. Improvised is also a human word. The Vale have no equivalent. I checked. They had a working prototype in 6 weeks. I closed the folder. I asked Owen where Director Finn was. He pointed at a building across the tarmac, long and low, the kind of structure that had been expanded 3 times and was currently being expanded a 4th. I walked over. Finn was standing in front of a wall-sized display, talking to 7 people at once, pointing at sections of a diagram with a coffee cup that had clearly not been refilled in several hours. He was a tall man, angular, the kind of person who looked like he had been designed for emergency use and left running ever since. He turned when I walked in. "Ambassador," he said. "Not anymore," I said. He looked at the folder under my arm. "Then you have seen page 1. Come see page 12. Page 12 was the rail launch grid. A standardized orbital launch system that could theoretically put a payload anywhere in the inner system in under 4 hours. It had been in planning for 20 years. The budget had never cleared the committee stage. The budget had cleared the committee stage 9 days after the vote. Unanimously. I went through the folder standing up. Page by page. The Alcubierre refinements. The rail grid. The protein folding solution, which Finn told me, with a completely straight face, had been sitting in a public online forum since 2031, a comment in a thread that nobody had taken seriously because it was written in casual language by someone whose username translated roughly to something like Noodle Boy. Turns out Noodle Boy was right. We had just never been desperate enough to look carefully. "There is more," Finn said. "I can see that. We are not just building," he said. He paused. "We are workshopping." That word landed somewhere in my chest. Workshopping. Not surviving. Not holding on. Not waiting to be rescued or reintegrated. Workshopping. Taking the situation apart like a broken engine, finding the useful pieces, building something new from the gap between what we had and what we needed. I stayed at that facility for 3 days. Then I moved to the next one. And the next. Over the following months I traveled to 17 different sites across 4 continents. Every one of them looked the same from the outside, understaffed, under-resourced, running on bad coffee and very long hours. Every one of them was producing something that the Council's model said was not possible without galactic supply chains. Galactic supply chains are very convenient. They are not, strictly speaking, necessary. At a facility in northern Norway I met a team working on energy storage systems. Their lead engineer was a woman named Petra, 34, who had a habit of explaining complex physics through analogies involving baking, which I initially found charming and eventually found genuinely useful. She walked me through a containment system that was, by any standard I knew, a significant leap beyond anything available on the galactic market. I asked her when they had started this project. She said 16 months ago, meaning approximately 3 weeks before the vote. I asked if the vote had affected her work. She thought about it. "It removed 6 vendors," she said. "But it also cleared my calendar." I wrote that down. About 8 months in, Kate found me in a temporary office in what had previously been a storage building and handed me a tablet. On the screen was an internal broadcast, Earth-only signal, closed network, from a school in rural Ontario. A science fair. Children showing their projects to a panel of local judges. Kate pointed at one entry. A girl, 11 years old, with straight-cut bangs and the kind of focused expression that makes adults quietly nervous, stood in front of a small device built from a hardware store kit and components sourced from a paper she had found in an open-access science archive. She explained, in clear and unhurried language, what her project was. It was an antimatter containment prototype. Working proof of concept. Not theoretical. Working. She placed second. I watched the clip twice. I did not say anything. Kate, who knew me well enough to not need me to say anything, took the tablet back when I was done. The judge who placed the girl second had given the top spot to a climate modeling project, which was also excellent, and I hold no opinion about it. Second place. Second place, with a device that the Orathe had spent 60 years and more money than I can sensibly express trying to miniaturize. Second place, because nobody told her it was supposed to be impossible. That was month 8. By month 12 I had a document. Not 902 pages. Something different. Something that did not ask for anything. Something that listed, in precise and organized detail, everything we had built, everything we understood, and, in a separate appendix that I kept carefully worded and completely factual, everything we now understood about the Council's enforcement infrastructure. Not as a threat. As a filing. The Council's model said we would fracture in 14 months. On month 14 I was sitting in a meeting with Finn and 7 others, reviewing the readiness status of a fleet assembled from components that, 12 months earlier, had not existed. Finn asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about Yemi. About Kate, who had not slept a full night in 3 months. About Owen and his 2 large ears, who had been coordinating internal communications with a focus that suggested he had aged 5 years in 14 months. I thought about the girl at the science fair. We are going to make contact, I said. But we are going to do it right. What does right look like? Finn asked. We file the paperwork first, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. All right, he said. He did not ask what paperwork. He had worked with me long enough. The council's models assumed we would fracture. Turns out, humans are spectacularly bad at fracturing when someone else tells us to. The Kreth patrol vessel picked us up on their long-range sensors 6 hours before visual contact. I know this because we let them. We could have stayed dark. The new drive systems were quiet enough. Finn's team had spent 3 weeks specifically on the acoustic and electromagnetic signature question, because Finn's team spent 3 weeks on every question before they were satisfied. But dark was not the point. The point was to be seen clearly, in full daylight, giving the Kreth captain enough time to call his superiors, enough time for his superiors to call their superiors, and enough time for everyone in that chain to be very awake and very present when we made contact. We wanted attention. We just wanted it on our schedule. The fleet held position at the edge of the buffer zone. 81 vessels. No formation. No military arrangement, no flanking wings or ceremonial flag placement or the kind of theater that galactic species use to announce themselves. Just ships, positioned according to function. Supply craft near the rear. Relay ships along the perimeter. The larger engineering vessels in the middle where their sensor arrays could cover the most ground. It looked, from the outside, exactly like what it was, a working operation, not a performance. The Kreth captain's first hail came in on standard council frequency. Very correct. He identified his vessel, his rank, his authority under the containment directive. He asked us to state our designation and purpose. Owen was handling communications. He looked at me. I said, send it. We transmitted the document package in 47 languages simultaneously. Not a message. A document. Specifically, a trade manifest. 31 pages, organized by category, listing in full technical detail everything humanity was prepared to offer in exchange for formal renegotiation of the containment directive. The captain's response took 4 minutes. I imagined him reading it. Then reading it again. Then calling someone. His second hail came 11 minutes after the first. He asked if we were serious. Owen looked at me again. I said, yes, and please transmit the attached secondary document now. The secondary document was the one I had started writing in the holding suite on the night of the vote. The one I had spent 14 months making thorough. 1,112 pages, organized into 53 sections, each covering a different member of the Galactic Council, their trade dependencies, their infrastructure layout, their alliance structures, the names and positions of every ambassador who had voted, the pressure points of their economies, their known vulnerabilities. It was not a threat. There was not a single threatening sentence in it. No hostile language anywhere in the document. Every fact was sourced from public council records, open diplomatic archives, and 14 months of very careful and completely legal research by a team of people who had nothing else to do. It was, in the purest sense, a filing. The captain's response to that one took 22 minutes. During those 22 minutes, Owen brought me a cup of coffee. It was bad coffee, the kind made by someone who respects the idea of coffee but has been too busy to practice. I drank every drop. When the captain's hail returned, his voice was different. Still professional. Still correct. But the particular tone that authority figures use when they are completely confident had been replaced by something quieter. He asked to speak with whoever was in command. I opened the channel. This is Sarah Voss, I said. Former Earth Ambassador to the Galactic Council. Currently representing the United Earth Defense and Trade Authority. How can I help you? There was a pause. What is the United Earth Defense and Trade Authority? He asked. It is new, I said. We have been busy. Another pause. Ambassador Voss. This fleet, the document you transmitted, I need to understand what Earth's intentions are. I had prepared an answer for this question. I had prepared several. I went with the honest one. We intend to trade, I said. We intend to negotiate. And we intend to have a formal seat at the council table, with full voting rights and an open communication channel, within 90 days. That is not, he stopped. I heard him consulting someone off-channel. The containment directive is current law. I know, I said. I read it. I am actually somewhat familiar with the original framework it was based on. I would be happy to walk you through the specific procedural mechanism by which it can be challenged and overturned. It is in the secondary document, section 31. I can flag the page if that would be helpful. The pause this time was longer. You built all of this, he said, in 14 months. 14 months and 3 weeks, I said. We like to be accurate. He asked me then, and I could hear that he was genuinely asking, not asking as a tactical move or to buy time, why we had not simply used the fleet as a weapon. Why the manifests and the documents? Why the formality? I looked out the viewport at the buffer zone. At the edge of the space that had been drawn around my planet like a fence. We thought about it, I said. And we filed the paperwork first. The channel was quiet. I let it stay quiet. After a while he said, I need to contact the council. I know, I said. We will hold position. We held position for 11 hours and 20 minutes. The fleet ran quiet. Owen organized a rotation so people could rest and eat. Petra walked around the ship explaining how the drive systems worked using bread-baking analogies. A small group formed around her. Someone laughed at something. I ate a sandwich. I read through section 31 again, not because I needed to, just because reading it steadied me. All those names. All that careful, thorough, completely legal research. Yemi had loved research. Loved the process of it, the slow building of a case from fragments and public records and small careful questions. I had teased her about it once, early on, said she would have made a better archivist than a diplomat. She told me they were the same job, if you were doing them right. She was not wrong. When the captain's final response came, it was brief. He was authorizing passage to the council station for a delegation of up to 12, under temporary protected status, for the purpose of formal negotiation. The fleet would remain at the buffer zone. I told Owen to confirm. Then I went to my bunk for 4 hours and slept the way you sleep when something has been wound tight for a very long time and the first thread is finally, carefully loosened. The captain sent his message to the council that same night. I did not see the full text until later. When I did see it, I understood why the Archon himself, not an ambassador, the Archon, was in the chamber when I arrived. The captain's message had been 140 pages. He had been thorough. He had clearly been reading our documents. The chamber smelled like recycled nitrogen and something floral again. Same chamber. Same seats. Same high ceiling and pale light that made everyone look slightly unwell. The Orathi stress pheromones were at garden level again, which I noted and put aside. Half the ambassadors were new faces, replacements who had arrived very suddenly following certain retirements that the council's public communications described as voluntary and that I suspected were somewhat less than that. The Vale ambassador in the back row was the same as before. His secondary eyelids were already partially closed when I walked in. I walked in alone. This was noticed immediately. A protocol officer met me at the entrance and asked where my delegation was. I told her I was the delegation. She looked at the tablet under my arm. She looked at me. She made a small, careful note on her own device and showed me to the Earth seat, which had a new placard, which I chose to read as optimistic. The Archon of the Kreth Dominion stood at the central podium. This was not normal. The Archon did not attend ordinary sessions. He attended situations that required authority beyond what an ambassador could carry. He was tall, older, his ceremonial gray a deeper shade than Drell's had been, the kind of gray that signals seniority in Kreth culture. His bioluminescent collar, a biological feature, not decoration, the Kreth cannot control it, glowed a steady blue. Blue meant composed. Blue meant in control. I sat down. I placed the tablet on the table in front of me. The Archon opened the session. He spoke for 6 minutes, outlining what he called the extraordinary circumstances that had brought the Council to an emergency review of the containment directive as it applied to Earth. His language was diplomatic. Careful. He mentioned humanity's unexpected developments in a tone that a schoolteacher might use when a student had done something technically impressive but procedurally inconvenient. Then he offered revised terms. I let him finish. All of it. The revised terms were more generous than the original directive: relaxed communication restrictions, limited trade access, a 12-month review period before full containment status was re-evaluated. He presented them as a significant concession. They were, compared to the original directive. They were not, compared to what I had come to ask for. I thanked him. I stood up. I put the tablet on the table. I turned it so the screen faced the room. I opened the file. A 17-second clip played. I am not going to describe exactly what was in it. Not because it was violent or dramatic in the way that word usually means. What it showed was quiet. A demonstration, recorded in a facility in the Atacama Desert 2 weeks earlier, of a specific technical capability that humanity had developed in the last 14 months. A capability that, when applied to a very particular set of coordinates, would produce a very particular result. The coordinates in question were not on Earth. 17 seconds. In the chamber, the Veil ambassador's secondary eyelids snapped shut completely. Both sets. The Orathi delegation, 4 of them, went from garden smell to something sharp and unpleasant that I did not have a name for, but that clearly meant distress. 2 of them stood up from their seats. The Kreth Archon's bioluminescent collar dimmed. Not dark. Not red. Just dim. Like a light uncertain about what color it was supposed to be next. I waited until the clip ended. Then I closed the file. The Containment Directive's enforcement infrastructure, I said, relies on 37 networked relay points arranged in the buffer zone around Earth. Those relay points are what makes the directive functional. Without them, the military and communication restrictions cannot be maintained. I paused. I let that sit. Over the past 14 months, Earth's technical teams have identified 31 structural vulnerabilities in that network. Not theoretical vulnerabilities. Tested ones. The clip you just watched is a demonstration of what occurs when one of those vulnerabilities is activated. The chamber was quiet in a way that chambers full of 47 species almost never are. I want to be clear, I said. We have not activated any of those vulnerabilities. We do not intend to activate them as long as this process moves forward in good faith. We are here to negotiate. We are here because we believe a legal and diplomatic resolution is better for everyone in this room than any alternative. I sat down. The Archon's collar was still dim. He said, after a moment, that he appreciated my candor. I said, I appreciate the chance to be candid. He asked what Earth wanted. And here is where the 14 months compressed into something small and sharp and precise. Here is where all of Yemi's research and Finn's workshopping and Petra's long explanations and Owen's careful coordination came down to a list of sentences I had written and rewritten over 3 months until every word was the right one. I presented Earth's terms. Full restoration of all communication relays. Immediate lifting of all trade restrictions. A permanent seat on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. A permanent seat on the Enforcement Commission, specifically with oversight authority over containment directives. Formal recognition of the United Earth Defense and Trade Authority as a sovereign interstellar entity. And a clause requiring that any future containment directive filed against any species must be reviewed by a cross-species panel composed of no fewer than 3 species with no direct economic interest in the outcome. That last clause was the important one. Not for Earth. For everyone else. The Archon asked for a recess. I granted it. As though it were mine to grant. Perhaps it was. I was not certain anymore, and I had decided that the ambiguity was useful and I was going to leave it there. During the recess I stood at the window looking out over the station's outer ring. Owen appeared at my elbow. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one without a word. Good coffee. Real coffee, from Earth, which he had apparently brought in a thermos from the transport. I looked at him. He shrugged. Figured it might be a long day. I drank the coffee. Kate came over. She had been in the gallery as documentation officer, which was a polite way of saying she was watching everyone in the room and writing down what she observed. She said, "The Vale ambassador wants to speak with you." I found Nadia, the Vale ambassador, silver gray, quiet, one of those people who conveys more in a pause than most species do in a full speech, standing near the back of the gallery. Her secondary eyelids were still closed. When she saw me approach, they opened. She said, in a low voice, "The two abstentions." I said, "I remember." She said, "Yemi was very persuasive." I said, "She was." Nadia looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I will be voting with Earth today." I said, "Thank you." She started to say something else. I could see it forming, something that might have been an explanation or a justification or an apology for 14 months and 2 abstentions instead of 2 votes against. I said, "You do not need to." She closed her secondary eyelids once, briefly. Then opened them. Then walked away. The recess lasted 40 minutes. When the Archon returned, his collar had stabilized. Deep blue, steady. He had made his decision and settled into it the way experienced authority figures do, not comfortable, but committed. He said the council was prepared to discuss Earth's terms. Not accept. Discuss. That was fine. Discussion was the door. We had 14 months of preparation and 31 verified structural vulnerabilities waiting behind us. Discussion was all we needed. The session lasted 9 hours. I will not walk through every exchange. Some of it was technical, verification protocols, timeline frameworks, the specific legal language required to amend a containment directive under Galactic law. Some of it was political. 3 delegations attempted to introduce counter-amendments that I recognized as delay tactics and addressed with specific citations from the secondary document that made the relevant ambassadors very quiet very quickly. By hour 6, the communication relay restoration was agreed. By hour 7, the trade restrictions were lifted. By hour 8, the council seat. The Enforcement Commission oversight clause took until the final hour. The Archon pushed back 3 times. The 3rd time, I opened the secondary document on my tablet and turned it so he could see the section bearing his name. I did not say a word. I let him read. He stopped pushing back. By hour 9 we had a draft. I asked for the formal signing session to be scheduled for the following morning. Standard diplomatic procedure. The Archon agreed. He approached me after the session cleared. The room was nearly empty. His collar had settled to a neutral gray, the Kreth version of a blank expression. He said, "Your species demonstrated something remarkable. The ability to develop, in 14 months, capabilities that most civilizations require centuries to." It was not remarkable, I said. He paused. "We were bored," I said. "And someone told us we could not. Those 2 things together are very dangerous." He considered this carefully. "Then, I will remember that." "Good," I said. I went back to the suite. Same bunk. Same pale gray ceiling. I lay down and looked at it for a while. I did not iron anything. I was too tired, and the work was not done yet, and ironing before the work was done had always been the habit, not ironing after. Tomorrow was after. The signing chamber was smaller than the main council hall. Quieter. Someone had placed flowers on the side tables, real ones, not a scent cover, actually grown flowers in small ceramic pots, which was either a very thoughtful touch or someone's idea of a joke, and I decided it did not matter which. It smelled like flowers and anxiety. 47 species. Same seats. The difference was the table in the center, and the document on it, and the fact that for the first time in 14 months, the chair with Earth's placard was not the loneliest seat in the room. Owen was behind me to the left. Kate to the right. Petra had come. I had not asked her to. She had simply appeared at the transport the previous evening with a bag and a thermos and a look that said she was not discussing it. 3 members of Finn's policy team filled the remaining delegation seats. They were all younger than me. They were all very awake. I had slept 5 hours. It was enough. The Archon opened the session briefly. Very brief, 2 sentences. Just the formal declaration that the session was convened for the purpose of signing the amended status agreement between the Galactic Council and the United Earth Defense and Trade Authority. Then he sat down. The document was read aloud by a protocol officer. All 42 articles. It took just under an hour. I listened to every word. Not checking, I had read the final draft 4 times the night before. Just listening. Letting it become real. Article 1, the immediate and full restoration of Earth's communication relay network. Article 7, the permanent lifting of all trade and movement restrictions defined under the Containment Directive. Article 15, the admission of Earth as a full voting member of the Galactic Council, effective upon signing, with all rights and privileges accorded to founding members. Article 22, the establishment of an Earth seat on the Galactic Enforcement Commission, with specific oversight authority over the filing, review, and implementation of all future containment directives. Article 31, the cross-species review requirement for all future directives. The clause I had written last, rewritten most, and cared about most. Article 42, the formal recognition of the United Earth Defense and Trade Authority as a sovereign interstellar governing entity with full standing under galactic law. When the reading ended, the signing began. Species by species, in the order of their accession to the original Council Charter, each delegation moved to the table and signed. Some used styluses. Some used light pattern confirmation. The Orathi signed in the middle of the order and smelled, briefly, like rain. I looked that up later. In Orathi emotional language, rain means relief. The veil went near the end. Nadia walked to the table slowly. Not slow because she was uncertain. Slow the way people are slow when they are taking a moment seriously. She looked at the document for a moment before she signed. Then she looked at me. Then she signed. The Kreth Archon was last. He stood at the table. He looked at the document for a long time. His collar was very steady, very deep blue, decided. He picked up the signing stylus and wrote his name and set the stylus down and stepped back. Owen, behind me, made a small sharp sound. Not quite a cheer. The beginning of one, stopped by something bigger than the cheer was, the weight of the moment landing before the sound could catch up. I reached back and put my hand on his shoulder. Not to stop him. Just to feel it. The aliveness of it. He was 22, and he had worked harder in the last 14 months than most people work in a decade, and he deserved every second of this. I kept my hand there for a moment. Then I walked to the table and I signed for Earth. My name on a document next to the Archons. On a document that, 12 hours earlier, he had not wanted to sign. On a document that meant 8 billion people on a planet that had been told to sit down and wait for reintegration had instead built something extraordinary in the dark, with bad coffee and hardware store components and a kid's science fair project and years of accumulated patience and very thorough paperwork. I signed it. I set the stylus down. There was a moment, just a moment, where the room held the way rooms hold after something large and irreversible has happened. Every species was still. Even the Orathi, whose secondary limbs were usually in some kind of motion, were still. Then the moment passed and the room began to move again. Owen cheered. So did 3 members of Finn's team. Kate, who was not a cheering person, smiled in the way she smiled when something had finally happened exactly as it should have. Petra was writing something in her notebook. I did not ask what. People were talking. Delegations were moving. Someone nearby was already discussing follow-up protocols and implementation timelines. The machinery of governance clicking immediately back into operation, which is sometimes infuriating and today was exactly what you want. The Archon found me about 20 minutes later. The room was still half full, small clusters of species doing what species do after large formal events, the careful renegotiation of posture, the quiet re-establishment of what the room means now that the table has shifted. He stood beside me and looked at the window. The station's outer ring. The same view from the holding suite, different window, different meaning. He said, humanity's resilience in the past 14 months was extraordinary. I turned to look at him. It was not resilience, I said. He waited. Resilience is when you bend and come back, I said. We did not bend. He looked at me. We just did not die on anyone's schedule but ours. He was quiet for a moment. His collar shifted briefly, something between blue and a color I did not have a name for. Then it settled back to blue. I find, he said carefully, that I am not certain whether that should reassure me. It should, I said. We are here to trade. We are here to build things. We are here to sit at the table and file the paperwork and argue the fine points of interstellar law for the next several hundred years. And if the table is unwelcoming again, he asked. Then we will keep building things, I said. And filing the paperwork. We are very patient. And we are very thorough. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he inclined his head, a crest gesture meaning something between acknowledgement and respect, though the line between the two in their culture is not always clear. Then he walked away. Kate appeared at my elbow. Ready to go, she asked. Almost, I said. I crossed the room to where Nadia was standing with two members of her delegation. She saw me coming. Her secondary eyelids opened fully, the veil equivalent of a raised eyebrow. I said, the Cross-Species Review Clause. Article 31. She said, what about it? I said, it protects you as much as it protects us. Make sure your delegation understands that. She looked at me for a moment. They will, she said. I started to turn away. Then she said my name. I stopped. She said, your colleague. The one who. Yemi, I said. Yes. A pause. She argued for 2 hours, in private session, that the Veil had a moral obligation to vote against the directive. Not abstain. Vote against. I said, I know. She was right, Nadia said. I said, I know. There was nothing else to say after that. Nadia's secondary eyelids closed and opened once, slowly. I nodded. Then I walked back to where Owen and Kate and Petra were waiting. Owen had produced a paper cup of bad coffee from somewhere. He held it out. I took it. It tasted like ambition and insufficient sleep, which was the most appropriate flavor I could imagine for this specific morning. We walked out of the signing chamber together. The corridor outside was long and pale, the standard Creth station aesthetic, clean lines and gray and recycled light. Our footsteps echoed. Owen was talking to Petra about the drive systems, something technical I mostly let wash over me. Kate was on her communicator, already sending the signed document package to Finn, who was probably awake and waiting and who I knew would respond within 90 seconds with something exactly like good, followed immediately by 3 follow-up questions. My communicator buzzed. Finn's message. Good. Now, 3 questions. I smiled at the ceiling. We reached the transport bay. The shuttle back to the fleet was already warming up. Through the bay window I could see the buffer zone. The relay points. The infrastructure that had held Earth silent for 14 months, convinced that silence meant defeat. In 72 hours, by the terms of Article 1, those relays would begin transmitting again. Earth's signal, news, broadcasts, conversations, the ordinary and irreplaceable noise of 8 billion people going about their lives, would start flowing back into the galactic network. I thought about what it would sound like to everyone listening for the first time. Loud, probably. We are not, as a species, quiet. Good. I had one thing left to do before boarding. I opened my tablet. I found the personal file, not the trade manifest, not the secondary document, not the policy frameworks. A file with just a few items saved in it. One of them was a broadcast clip I had watched twice in a monitoring facility 8 months ago, in a building in a country I had been glad to be working in the middle of the long darkness. A girl at a science fair. 11 years old. Straight cut bangs. Second place. I watched it a third time. She explained her project in the same unhurried voice. Same focused expression. The device sat on the table in front of her, a working proof of concept, built from a hardware store kit and components sourced from a paper she had found in an open archive because she had needed an answer and gone looking for one, which is the simplest and most accurate description of how most important things in human history had ever happened. The judge asked her one question. She answered it fully and then added a detail from her testing that he had not asked about, because she found it interesting and thought he should know. The judge wrote something down. She placed second. She did not look disappointed. She looked like someone who had already moved on to thinking about what she was going to build next. I closed the file. I thought about the vote. 44-1. The lights going out down the hallway. The holding suite and the pale gray ceiling and the list I had started writing that night, which had become the document, which had become the fleet, which had become this morning. I thought about Yemi arguing for 2 hours in a private session that the veil had a moral obligation. She was always thorough. I thought about the Archon's collar going dim. About the garden smell from the Arathi at the signing table. About Nadia's secondary eyelids and Owen's almost cheer and Kate's particular kind of smile. I thought about mercy. About choosing architecture over fire. About the specific kind of decision you make when you have every justification to do something much larger and more permanent and you choose instead to build a table and sit at it and argue the fine points for the next several hundred years. Some people call that patience. Some call it strategy. I called it the only thing that made sense, which is what you call choices that cost something and are right anyway. Owen appeared at the shuttle hatch. We are ready when you are. I picked up my tablet. I finished the bad coffee. Let us go home, I said. The shuttle lifted clean and quiet, the new drive systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. No shudder. No noise. Just motion. We cleared the station. The buffer zone spread out below us, the relay points, the boundaries, the careful architecture of containment that had been constructed in 12 days and spent 14 months convinced it had done its job. It had done us a favor. I looked at it one more time. The whole shape of it. The fence around a planet full of people who had responded to a fence the way humans generally respond to fences, by getting interested in what was on the other side and figuring out how to get there. Then the station dropped behind us, and there was only the fleet, and the stars, and the long way home. 44 votes to contain us. They forgot the paperwork cuts both ways. We filed ours.